Hello and welcome, everyone. I'll just give everyone a brief moment to come on to this webinar, join us. We know from looking at the list of registrations, people are joining us today from all over the world. So whether it's good evening, good morning, or good afternoon for you in your time zone, we just want to welcome you to this CCARE Stanford Open House for the ACT program. I'm Neelama Eyres. I'm one of the co-founders and directors of the ACT program at CCARE Stanford. And we're coming together today in this open house to give everyone here a chance to learn more about the ACT program that's offered at CCARE, and also to learn about and take inspiration from the important role that applied compassion is playing in our world right now. For us here at ACT, when we use the term applied compassion, we're referring to those tangible, practical, real, demonstrable ways that compassion is being offered, experienced, and ultimately applied in very real-world settings like companies, organizations, healthcare systems, schools, and communities. The ways that compassion and the behaviors associated with compassion find a real, tangible application in our world. So in just a moment, we'll have the opportunity to hear from Dr. Doty, who's the founder and director of CCARE at Stanford, and he'll be sharing a little bit about why applied compassion is so crucial in our world right now and what makes the ACT program unique. We'll also get a chance in this session to hear from 3 of our amazing ACT graduates from our 2020 program. And each of these graduates will be sharing how their projects, what they developed in the ACT program, has taken root in the different fields in which they work. So as a way to get us started, I'm going to pass this over now to my colleague, Robert Cusick, who will guide us in a brief settling practice to help us arrive and really bring our full presence to this experience today. Robert?
Great. Thank you, Neelama. And welcome everybody from wherever you're sitting in the world to this webinar tonight. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you. So to get started, just to sort of shift gears and prepare for us to change the pace that we have arrived at this webinar with, I am going to invite you to just to close your eyes for a moment, and if you're willing to, and just take a breath and feel into the experience of simply sitting with yourself and recognizing what it's like when we pause for a moment and notice that we can anchor ourselves by simply noticing the contact of our feet on the floor or the weight of our body on the chair that we're sitting on. Just following the flow of our breath in and out, not doing anything special, we're just pausing, noticing, connecting with ourselves. And in this quieter space, I invite you to open up to really listen to the stories that you'll hear tonight. They're so inspiring, the people who have done these projects. Really just open up, see how they land for you. Okay, take another nice deep breath, and you can open your eyes and come back to your computer screen. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce Dr. James Doty. Dr. Doty is the founder and director of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford. And he's spearheaded many research projects on compassion and altruism and their relationship to the brain. He's also an inventor and a philanthropist, and he sits on the board of a number of charities. And in all of his spare time, he's writing another new book and working on a new podcast. And I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Doty. And maybe, Jim, you can share with us the title of your forthcoming book before you get started. And I give the floor to you.
Well, thank you, Robert. And I just want to acknowledge Neelama, Robert, and Monica as the co-founders and really the drivers behind this program and fundamentally the success of this program. As many of you may know, we've had just finished a cohort which represented 60 countries. And each individual has to do a capstone project. And it's really been quite extraordinary to see the projects that people have developed. And in fact, we're going to share 3 of those this evening, or whatever time zone you're in. Why compassion now? Well, of course, throughout the evolution of our species, compassion has been critically important. Unfortunately, the nature of evolution is slow, but modern society evolves very fast. And as a result, compassion has not been at the forefront of many people's thoughts. They're trying to survive in a very complicated, complex world. And as a result, especially in the face of the pandemic, it has caused an immense amount of stress, anxiety, loneliness, and oftentimes depression. But the antidote to depression and stress and anxiety and rumination is not to turn inward, but to turn outward. Now, in some ways, this may seem a paradox because oftentimes we will use the statement that the only way you can find happiness is within yourself. And certainly, I think that's true. But that being said, for many people, they spend a great deal of time being very hypercritical with themselves. And as a result, that reflection clouds their vision of the outside world. And not only is each of us suffering, but everyone is suffering on some level. And it's really important that we remember this and not make assumptions about how someone is feeling or their particular position. Certainly, I've met enough people who externally appear to be extraordinarily successful and in fact have very, very deep suffering. And the point of this course, and what really excites me, is that all of us have an inherent or innate ability to be compassionate. But what the goal of this course is to potentiate that and make you see how within yourself you have this immense power, not only to heal yourself and to be kind to yourself, but actually to extend that outward and embrace the other. And that is the ultimate goal. When we are able to see the other as ourselves, then that allows us to be truly compassionate. Because when you see the world through that lens, first of all, it makes being compassionate much easier, but it also makes you see that we are one species. This is a reality of this principle of common humanity. And it takes us from thinking of us or me to the concept of we, but beyond the we is the world and all of its inhabitants. And when we release this innate power within each of us through these types of reflective practices, then that allows us to be truly change makers. And it allows us actually to unleash this incredible power that is in each of us. And that's what makes me very excited. ACT, or Applied Compassion Training, it actually creates a foundational support with principles and practices that are necessary to allow that to manifest. It's a launching pad to the future for many of us to create a better credible foundation to bring these ideas regarding compassion into organizations and institutions. Many of the people who have been involved in the past have come from the areas of healthcare, corporate environment, and those individuals who focus their lives on the mind, body, spirit connection. And in all of these domains, compassion is really foundational for success, for thriving, and for each of us being able to reach our potential. So it really is quite extraordinary that we've been able to take the work that I initially began at CCARE and work with these extraordinary co-founders and teachers to create such a powerful program that I truly believe has and will continue to have an impact on the world. And each of you gets to be that change maker. Each of you gets to be the person who, through their actions after this program, empower others to embrace compassion as well. And what I have learned from my own experience, and some of you have read my book, Into the Magic Shop, which is a memoir that incorporates neuroscience and contemplative practice. But for those who haven't, from my own experience, frankly, of suffering, growing up in an environment with an alcoholic father and a mother who had a stroke, was paralyzed, chronically depressed, attempted suicide, I recognized early on as a child that I was suffering, and I was unhappy, and I was depressed, and I was angry, and I had a sense of hopelessness. But what happened to me was that, believe it or not, I walked into a magic shop and I met a woman who actually was the owner's mother. And she was a person who recognized me as a fellow human being. I was 12 years old. She didn't denigrate me. She listened to me, and she created what we call an environment of psychological safety. And then we spent 6 weeks together where she taught me, actually fundamentally, many of the principles that you're going to learn in this course. And what did that do? It took me from being fearful, from being anxious, from being afraid, to realize that within me was the power to change my environment. It allowed me to be kind to myself, to love myself, to believe I was worthy, which then allowed me to look at the world through a different lens. And it struck me then, why isn't humanity more compassionate in general? What stops people from being compassionate? What compels people to be compassionate? And oftentimes, what one needs to really have a clear picture of is suffering. And when you understand suffering, when you know what it's like to not be appreciated, when you feel ignored, when you feel lonely, this is what so many other people feel. But when you change your perspective and you go forward and embrace people who are suffering, when you care for them, when you focus your life on being of service, magic happens. You go from this ongoing negative dialogue to a different dialogue, an excitement, that is actually reflected not only in your mental health and your mind, if you will, but also in your peripheral physiology. And we now know that, one, when you're kind, when you're compassionate, this changes your physiology. Your reward centers, believe it or not, are stimulated. You are excited. You feel good. It actually even increases your ability to make thoughtful decisions, more discerning decisions. It makes you more productive. It makes you more creative. In terms of physiology, when you walk the walk of compassion, if you will, it has a fantastic ability to change how your body works. It decreases your blood pressure. It increases your immune system. It decreases the production of inflammatory proteins. It decreases stress hormones. And the very nature of this shift from this threat mode to this mode of reflection, this rest and digest system, our parasympathetic nervous system, then actually allows you to embrace this work and be happy about it and be excited about it. We know that also when you care for others, when you're in service to others, your telomeres actually increase in length. Now that's amazing, isn't it? By caring for others, you actually live longer. Many of us have read about the blue zones, these areas in the world where people live routinely for over 100 years. Now, much of that is attributed to diet. But in reality, and it's interesting because there are a gazillion books on the Mediterranean diet, but the most profound determinant is not that. The most profound determinants of longevity have to do with you caring and being of service, having strong connections socially, and having deep relationships. That's it. That's what we were created for. That's how we evolved. And that is how we end up being our best selves. So I'm really excited to be involved in this program, to make some contributions, hopefully, in the teaching of this program. And I'm so excited that you were interested. And I'm so blessed and thankful that we have such incredible teachers. I'd like to turn this now over to Neelama again, and she will give us some more information about this work and this program. And again, I hope you are excited about this because you can change the world. All we need to do is to make you believe it. And there's not a single thing that happens in this world that doesn't begin with one person, one person's dreams, one person's aspirations. And the reality is, simply caring for one person and making their life better actually is enough as well. And each of us every day has the ability to improve the life of another. So thank you, Neelama. Thank you. I turn it back over to you. And again, I'm very appreciative for being with you today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Doty. Just listening to you is always a huge inspiration for me. So thank you so much for your commitment to compassion and for all of your ongoing and important work in this field. We so appreciate you. And thank you also for the reminder that this is what we're created for. I love that. Each and every one of us has this inherent capacity to be compassionate. So in one way, we're not in our program teaching or giving anyone something. We're more excavating that inherent capacity that's already there and turning that capacity, as you said so wisely, we can have the capacity, but not actualize it. So I love this also in thinking about ACT as a program. It's an opportunity to actualize this compassion that's already inherent within us. And we do that through tangible actions, which is what our program is about. Actualizing, taking actions, and practicing in small and large ways those behaviors that are consistent with compassion. I know my colleagues, Robert and Monica, the way we hold this as a team at ACT is that in order for our systems, our institutions, even our world to operate more from this inherent foundation of compassion, action is necessary. It's not enough just to want it, just to think about it. We got to get out there and do it. And so I'm just inspired by your thinking about it in that way too, and reminding us that one of the key actions that we need to take is recognizing suffering. Of course, compassion is a response to suffering. So that's one of the first actions we can take, is taking the time to recognize suffering when we see it, and also remembering and acknowledging our common humanity, which may be more important now than it ever was, right? Focusing and remembering on that which unites us versus that which divides us. So in just a few moments, you'll have the opportunity, those joining in today, to hear from our 3 graduates and hear how their capstone projects actualized compassion in their various fields. But before we do, and just to create a little bit of context for any of you that are not familiar with our program, just want to give you a super brief overview of what the program is, so that when you hear the graduates sharing in a moment, you kind of have some context of what is all this about. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And first and foremost, ACT is an 11-month program, and people are with us for the entire 11 months. We started out in 2020 with our first cohort, originally intending to be an in-person program that would meet at Stanford campus 3 times a year. And I don't need to tell all of you, just like everybody else, we got also hit with the curveball of COVID. And we've been able to pivot the program to being an online experience. And we really prioritize being together online. This is not a recording or an on-demand program as much as really a creation of a global community. That's another maybe silver lining for us with COVID, is that the program has been able now to have a huge global reach. And so participants in the program, we call them leaders when they enter the program, because for someone to commit 11 months of their life and sign up to do a capstone project and invest the time and the money that the program requires, we already know they're a leader in this field, or they wouldn't come to a program like this. The program, as Dr. Doty already shared with you, centers around a capstone project. And a very brief description of that is some public-facing way of bringing compassion into a real-world setting. It could be a healthcare system, it could be a school, it could be a community, some way where compassion is brought in for the benefit of individuals within that system. The program sort of rests on a few foundational elements. As Dr. Doty shared with you, it's a program that really is teaching evidence-based practices and principles of compassion. We're not teaching a formula or a prescription for compassion as much as we are equipping people with practices and principles so they can go out and really tailor and customize a particular capstone project for their audience, for their environment. We come together, even though we're not coming together in person on the campus, we come together 3 times a year for 3-day immersion retreats where we're all together live online in our big group. And we also come together as a large group for a teaching session every month where we study or focus on a particular aspect of compassion for that month. And then we also come together in smaller groups every month. Every participant in the program is assigned a mentor and gets individual mentoring, as well as is part of a smaller mentoring group that they kind of help each other along through the 11 months with. And even within that mentoring group, people are part of a smaller team, which kind of becomes their champions for helping them achieve the goals of their capstone project. I'm sure one, if not more, of our alumni who's going to be interviewed here tonight will share just how special those mentoring groups and those teams are. I know people have built lifelong friendships out of those teams, because you can imagine you're traveling pretty closely together and supporting each other. Another foundational element of the program that we've already said is we really prioritize action in this program. As much as the program will be about one's personal development and the embodiment of those principles and practices, we hold as equally valuable, how is this translating into the world in actionable, demonstrable ways? And all of that leads to ACT really being kind of like an incubator, a really powerful launching pad. And these capstone projects, and you'll hear about 3 of them in just a moment, are creating real significant impact in the fields that they're being delivered. So it's exciting for us to be able to share all of that with you and showcase 3 of these projects tonight. I also want to just show you how global we have become. As I said, in 2020, we started with our inaugural cohort, had 52 people. And in 2021, due to COVID and due to being able to translate this into an online experience, we nearly doubled in size and have participants joining, as you can see from the flags and the countries, really have participants joining from all over the world. And I can't tell you how many times my own mentees, and I know the same is true for Robert and Monica, have shared that being part of this global community of leaders that are single-pointedly focused on compassion is so empowering and uplifting and really motivating for people in the program. So we're so grateful that, this crisis of COVID, which has been heartbreaking on one level, has also for us allowed us to make the program more accessible to so many others. I'll give you just a brief peek at this last slide so you can see the different industries and the areas where people in the program have created capstone projects. We've got everything from what you might think, healthcare systems and human resources, all the way to law and law enforcement and science. And even writing, people writing a children's book. So there's so much depth and breadth with the projects and the impact that we can make in so many different fields. Compassion belongs, from our point of view, in all of these fields. So with all of that being said, I am going to turn this back over now to my colleague, Robert Cusick, who will be interviewing one of our 3 ACT alumni graduates for the session. So Robert, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much for sharing that with all of us. And it's my pleasure tonight to be interviewing our first alumni, our first speaker tonight, Dr. L.A. Alvarez. And in way of introduction, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about LA, and then I'll ask you a series of questions, LA, and we'll just have a discussion. So Dr. Alvarez is the national leader and educator on wellness, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion. He's a clinical assistant professor of emergency medicine and the director of well-being at Stanford Emergency Medicine. Dr. Alvarez co-leads the Human Potential Team and serves as the fellowship director of Stanford's Emergency Medicine Physician Wellness. And he's also the co-chair of the Stanford Well MD Physician Wellness Forum. His work focuses on humanizing physician roles through harnessing individual human potential in the context of high performance teams. So LA, welcome. And I have to say that your impeccable medical and academic credentials are at the same time both impressive and intimidating. And we've invited you here to share because I also know that underneath all of that credentialing is a real person who has done the work of compassion. So I'd like you to share a little bit of yourself with us tonight. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to just give us a small snapshot of your personal story and tell us what led you to ACT and what was your original motivation.
Thanks, Robert. And again, thanks for the introduction. Very generous of you and for the invitation here. I think a snapshot about me is that I'm a first-generation physician. I learned a lot of the things that I've learned through trial and error, and really I'm privileged to be in a position now to help make some changes to allow future physicians who may be first in their family to go to college, to go to medical school, to actualize that. In terms of my motivation, initial motivation to join the ACT, really it was I'm familiar with the work of CCARE, with the compassion cultivation training, your work actually, and somebody, one of your former students, reached out to me and said, "Hey, you might want to check this out." And it was from that one email that I've looked at it several times, and then there's like the capstone project and the time commitments. And long story short, really, it's my journey was to understand the impact of self-compassion and burnout, because I wanted to explore this further. And then the pandemic happened, and this group actually allowed me to anchor into a community that's focused on, in a way, forcing me to really train myself with mindfulness practices, the self-awareness that I'll keep on kind of going back here. And again, self-compassion. And the more I did it, the more I got to experience the benefits of self-compassion. I'm not sure if people here are aware of this, but physicians have the highest burnout amongst pretty much like any other professions. And in the same token, the data from WellMD highlights that physicians who have the highest self-compassion have the lowest burnout. And so I wanted to figure out ways to create like either initiatives or programs that really would foster self-compassion. And my initial idea was focusing on resilience. And we all know that that's actually not the way to do it. But highlighting our role in this, highlighting my own self agency allowed me to then really practice that self-compassion.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I want to ask you, I know that you work in a very stressful and demanding environment, and many people who work in environments like that, whether it's in medicine or the corporate world or whatever environment they're working in, they believe that in the heat of the moment, I hear this all the time, in the heat of the moment, that they have a job to do. So the response is, please don't talk to us about compassion. Please don't talk to me about compassion. There's neither the time nor the luxury to do anything other than pay attention to the task at hand. And it's clear that your training is solidly rooted in science and that you also work in this kind of an environment. And with that as a context, can you share with us how ACT has shifted your perspective on this cultural mindset and helped you communicate or model the role and importance of compassion to your colleagues and friends?
Yeah, I think that for me, one of the biggest benefit is this training to develop self-awareness. in my own space in emergency medicine, you're right. Like I deal with uncertainties a lot. I show up and I'm able to manage whatever comes our way, anyone for anytime, anywhere. That's the concept of emergency medicine. And yet I will also normalize that right now if I, as part of self-awareness, I'm nervous. I am intimidated being part of this panel right now because of the many great things that you have done. And so just like me, I know how it feels like or just like you, I know how it feels like to be nervous. And part of that self-awareness is right now I'm slowing the way that I talk. I'm slowing my breathing. Those things for me are very helpful. And so when people ask me like, I'm too tired, I'm too overwhelmed, I'm too busy to talk about compassion, oftentimes we associate it, at least in my line of work, with treating burnout. But in the other side of my work is really on performance and high performance teams, and how powerful it is for me to have that self-awareness when I'm feeling activated, when I'm feeling triggered, to then be able to slow things down, not just to think clearer, but also to appreciate the coolness of me being part of this group right now, allowing myself that compassion to also experience all the positive things that tend to overwhelm us with all the negative things that are happening as well, especially during the pandemic.
Yeah, slowing down. What a good reminder. So I have a couple of more questions that I'd like to ask you. And last August, when you presented to the ACT community of practice, you shared a number of examples about how your career blossomed in unexpected ways during your time in the program. And you attributed that growth in part to your participation in ACT. So my question is, what was it about participating in ACT that led to that career growth? And what were some ways that you also experienced growth on a personal level?
Got it. I think that's really embodying the teaching of compassion, especially for me, self-compassion was very helpful. For those of you who, most of you don't know me, to give you context, especially with the introduction that Robert gave about me, 3 years ago, I've only given, I think, 1 or 2 national lectures. And when I did that, I was like terrified because I would always feel nervous about giving the presentation. And then the more that I practiced compassion, initially I was very nervous that I was not feeling nervous because I needed that to actually motivate me. To then during the ACT, I had over 20 Grand Round lectures across the country and outside the country. I mean, that's just like one of the few things that I can highlight that this has impacted my work professionally. I can tell you just this week, I was invited to be part of the strategic team for the Society of Academic Emergency Physicians. So a group of people focusing on the future of academic emergency physician. And I shared this with Robert. When we were trying to figure out what can we do to help our colleagues manage moral injury, systems way of doing that, I said we need to talk more about self-compassion. So I mean, by me simply being part of that group, I was able to include like one of the checklists that people will actually talk about over the next several weeks to months as we formulate the plan for SAM, will be on self-compassion. And just this morning, I was in another meeting about resilience and residency program directors. And one of the deliverables was we need something about self-compassion. And again, like they asked me, hey, can you give us a talk on this? Can you write something about this? This is all new for me in a sense. And the reason why I feel comfortable doing it and have since developed a sense of, I would call it micro expertise, is because of the community that's ACT has provided, and also like the regular meetings that we've had talking about each of the aspects of compassion. So I can go on and on about this. I think another big thing for me is Prior to what you may have not heard is that I was one of the associate residency directors for emergency medicine at Stanford Emergency Medicine. So during my role, actually during my training at ACT, that was my role. I was in medical education. And just a few months ago, this role opened up, the director of well-being, and I got that promotion. What I'm trying to say, and you said earlier, it's intimidating, but for me, it's also intimidating because there's that imposter syndrome that happens as there's this like, what do I do? What do I talk about? And yet, if we go back to, and for those of you who will be joining this, you'll hear from Dr. Monica Warline. She talks about awakening compassionate work. And really, what I do, it's been like this circuitous or even like peripatetic way of bumping into different needs that really try to look into how can I make a difference? How might we include compassion in this work? And so one project leads to another, and then there's more collaboration, and then people hear about my work, and then I get invited to another thing. And so I think maybe that's the answer. That's how my career has blossomed. It's like one after another. But it's, for me, it's very authentic. And personally, it's actually because I'm able to say no to a lot of things, and also to understand like, crap, like I overcommitted. I signed up to so many things. I can tell you, just like an hour ago, I got a tweet about it. Hey, like, I know that we have not done so much about this project. What can I do to help you? And so my response, I'm so sorry. Like, I really am feeling overwhelmed. I would not have been able to do that before ACT. I would have been like staying up all night and trying to figure out like why I'm not good enough to do this. And now I'm able to just realize I've done my best. I will continue to do my best and still find time to take care of myself.
And your best is pretty darn good, LA. So you almost answered the last question that I had for you, but I'm going to pose it anyway. ACT has been a launching pad and an incubator for a vibrant, growing global community of compassion ambassadors. So in your own words, how has your ongoing alumni activity with ACT's worldwide network of ambassadors continued to support you in collaborative and creative ways?
Yeah, I think that in addition to publishing and doing these national and global talks, it's really access to experts, people like you, right? That not just for collaboration, but for support. You mentioned like I've done a lot, but if you can see my failure resume, all the things that I was not able to do, I think you'll be very, very impressed. And that I think is a better measure of what I was able to focus on. And I think that's very important because then I'm able to text. Dana and I are on the same mini group and kind of share our frustrations, share our celebrations. As Neelama mentioned, ACT is an incubator, and for me, again, it's this global community of practice. And so truly grateful for the opportunity and for all the things that I have gotten, truly a privilege. And at the same time, I think that when something is awakened within us as part of this training, it's a lot easier to take on different projects, different roles, because it's authentic and it feels good. And that magic that Dr. Doty was sharing earlier, like you get to experience that like every single day. And I think that's the coolest part of this.
Ale, thank you so much, really from the bottom of my heart. And I can speak for my colleagues, and I think I can speak for Dr. Doty as the founder and director of CCARE. Your contribution to medicine and to this whole compassion effort is so appreciated and so impactful. So thank you for being with us tonight, and thank you for your authenticity and your humanness. I wanted to really bring that out if I could, because I know that you're a big shot doctor, but you're also a beautiful human being, and it's just an honor to know you. So thank you.
Thank you. And again, I don't know about big shot. I think that common humanity, I'm just a normal, regular human being, just like you. So thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, so I now am going to pass the baton to my colleague, Neelama. You're going to go next, yeah. Okay, to Neelama, and Neelama will introduce a former alumni who she will be interviewing. So, Neelama.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, LA. I want to also say what strikes me about you is, you know, the bigness of who you are and your humanity. And that's just such a great teaching for everybody, that we have both of these potentialities in us. And so you represent that. And I love how you always share your vulnerability with us. And it's a wonderful teaching. So thank you for being with us today. And I get the pleasure and honor of talking to our next guest, our next ACT 2020 alumni, Dana Hoshino. And Dana is a senior instructional designer and learning consultant. She's been in this field for 24 years. And her career in the field really specializes in developing curriculum, coaching individuals, and leading courses and trainings, mostly for corporate clients. Dana's strength is in design. She really knows how to design instructional strategies that not only achieve success and meet performance objectives, but also create value through employee and customer relations. True cross-functional alignment, and getting to the heart of what matters most to the people she's working with clear and direct communication. Dana's work strives to make mindfulness and compassionate leadership and innovation an integral part of a successful solution for the organizations and clients that she works with. Dana, like I said, is one of our ACT 2020 graduates, and the capstone project that she created in ACT was a training in compassionate leadership, and she's delivered that training for 50 global corporate leaders to date. So really making a significant difference in this corporate sector. And Dana, we are so pleased and honored to have you with us today. So thank you for your time and for being with us. And I'm just going to launch right into our first question and then give you a chance to share a little bit. And what I'm curious about is how the ACT program and your capstone has both impacted you personally, because I know it has, we've had conversations about that, but also informed and impacted you professionally.
Well, first of all, thank you, Neelama, for the introduction. And also, as LA said, thank you for inviting me to be on this and share my experience, because it has been life-changing for sure. I think with the personal first, how it's affected me, I thought about that. I've been thinking about that since I've taken it and since I've actually gone into, activating my capstone. And really, if I look at it, it's affected my whole life. I mean, it's completely affected my whole life. It's affected how I relate to my family, how I relate to my friends, how I relate to acquaintances, how I respond to strangers. You learn all this information that just completely changes your aspect. It changes a part of you. And I think that comes from opening your heart. And opening your heart over a long period of time. The 11 months, and with the support of the people you're with, everyone has an open heart. And I think it's that experience that once that's open to that degree, I mean, you go back out and you really are changed. You're not going back. So you don't just deliver a capstone, go home, is what I like to say. So it really does change you. It changes you. It changed me for being a better human being and being able to contribute to a world really in a constructive way. Because we all want to help. We all see a need. But this was a path to fill a need, be able to do that. So I think that was the personal one. And then also I have to mention the mentor groups you talked about, the pods. As LA said, he and I are in the same pod of 5. We are lifelong friends. We have a text that we can always go to, that we can just plug into, and we can talk to each other. We can say, hey, what are you up to? Merry Christmas, happy birthday. Here's some training. Here's something I want to share. I love you, whatever it is. We're always there. That is never going to go away. I could reach out to one of my pod members, in 20 years, and they would be, just right there, just like that. And we kind of had that support with the whole group. Everybody was close because of this open heart, because of this topic, of common humanity and how we're here for a reason. Anybody who's on this webinar right now has been drawn here for a reason. I really learned that when I ended up where I ended up in the ACT program. I was like, this was no mistake. I'm here for a reason. So that was wonderful. So I think that's how it's affected me on a personal level. On a professional level, I train, as you said, I train corporate executives, corporate C-level management teams. And it creates kind of a push and pull in my life, because they're very encapsulated. They're very afraid of compassion on many levels, because it's just a different world. And here I'm training them, and I train in all verticals. I train in healthcare, I train in gas and oil, I train in transportation, I train in retail, I train in every vertical there is in business. So, when I thought about going into this program, I'm going to tell you something that's going to make you smile. I thought, well, here's what you got to do. You got to take 11 months. You got these things. Oh, and then you got to build a capstone. Oh, that's easy. I can do that. That's training. Little did I know. Oh yeah, I could build one, but deliver it, that was a whole different story. But it's been a beautiful thing. And I think that, LA mentioned Monica Warline and Jane Dutton's book, Awakening Compassion at Work. And that was a real godsend for me, because that's really what I'm doing right now. I'm really going into the corporate executive teams, and I'm awakening compassion at work. Right. So infusing leadership training at that top of the chain, I think that's what we really need to do, because there's so much power up there. There's so much, collective power, collective, just world influence through some of these major corporations. And I work with the top Fortune 100, Fortune 500. So they have a lot of power, and power speaks. And if we can get that power to speak in a good way, we're on the right track.
Thank you. Thank you. Kind of connected to that is my next question, which is, corporate leadership and compassionate action aren't terms that are historically paired in the business world. Yet you've managed to bridge these two worlds in training. And you've done it to date by training, like I said earlier, 50 of these global corporate leaders, in teaching them the power of compassionate leadership. So could you share a little bit about how the ACT program and delivering this capstone project prepared you to build that bridge in a more skeptical environment, as you talked about, where these leaders are encapsulated and maybe not open initially to the topic of compassion or compassionate leadership? How did the program help you in building that bridge?
Yeah, I think the first thing it did was it really prepared me by opening my heart. When you have an open heart and you come to people, they notice something, they see something. Even if they're skeptical, it's an invitation. They do notice and feel that you're willing to be there, literally be present. So I think first it prepared by opening my heart. So when I was going to go out and start training, these corporate executives that are going up the chain, I train people that are literally going up the chain to the next level. So they want to gather more skills. They're prepared to learn something, but they're not, opening the heart is a big deal. So when I come with an open heart, it's sort of like they go, this is a safe place for me to try to do that. I think the principles that I learned behind compassion, I think they're very powerful, and every single one of those applies to corporate leadership. At the top of the level, all the way down, literally to the employee. Awareness and mindfulness. Obviously, they have to be very aware. They're not familiar with mindfulness, so I train them in that, teach them what mindfulness really means. Being present. The humility is a big one. That principle, because holding your faults with your ego, get really out of balance with corporate leadership, especially the higher up you go. You get accolades for being CEO, or you get accolades for making a lot of money, you get accolades for promotions. People look up to you. Of course, they want to please you. Your direct reports, they want to please you. So holding that humility is really important. And I think that that's something they don't have a lot of practice at. But once you teach them about compassion, they see the importance of it, and they actually feel it. I think embodiment, which LA referred to, and I think Dr. Doty did too, is a full experience, the full experience of the embodiment of it, carrying it throughout you, your emotions, your intellect, all levels, your emotional intelligence. And the one thing that I think they're probably, I discovered over training these 50 leaders, I think the one thing they're most disconnected from is common humanity. Because they're in a corporation, they're focused on their own internal culture. They're constantly striving to improve that culture, to retain people in that culture. They're making it a good culture internally, but in that act, they sort of forget that the rest of the world is out there, and that they really affect the rest of the world. And the rest of the world affects them. So the concept of common humanity kind of wakes them up a little bit. Oh yeah, we've got customers. We focus on our customers, but what about people who aren't our customers? Shouldn't we be in service of them too, in some way? I kind of bring that to them, and it's a little bit of an aha moment. And the other one, inner strengths, as being a principle, that one is they really practice that, because they need to match that to external demands that are put on them constantly every day. But knowing how to not burn out, like L.A. said in his profession, knowing how to not burn out, knowing how to take that inner strength and use it to make your, in self-compassion, knowing when to say no, if you have to say no, those kind of things, knowing your limits. So I think those principles, every single one of them applied directly to my audience that I teach, with my capstone project. And then also, of course, this awakening compassion at work, that's just like a guidebook. That is a process guidebook that has so much information in it. I was just thrilled to actually find that resource. The guest speakers in the program were amazing. Every single one of them, I know I went back and looked at the recordings 2 or 3 times to hear them again, to catch more information, because they're all so passionate and they're such professionals. They're so qualified, and they bring so much information. And the community, that I can reach out to at any point in time for support, for more information. It's a lifelong connection. So that it brought a lot, yes.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you. You sort of touched on this in what you just shared, but I'm wondering if maybe you could just share a little bit more, because I know you just finished delivering one of these trainings to these 50 corporate leaders.
Yep.
What would they say in their words, about how they either personally, professionally, or even their organization has been impacted by your training and by learning about, as you said, this subject of compassion, maybe even for the first time? What is some of the feedback you've gotten from them about how they've been impacted by this?
Well, there's a couple of really poignant situations that stand out to me, and we're together for 6 months, so we get close. One of my the training I did 20 last year, 10 men, 10 women. I did 30 this year, 33 men, 17 women. 23 men, 17 women. And I had one in the first training, it was COVID. It was COVID, and everybody was in shell shock. You know, everybody they were frightened, they were afraid, they didn't know what was going on. It was June, lockdown had just happened. Some people had been locked down in their apartments for weeks. So it was a very vulnerable group. And I asked them on the very first module I delivered, which was mindfulness, compassion in leadership. I asked them, I thanked them for, being there and being, prepared to share. And I asked them to open their hearts if they could and just open up and tell me their experience. I prepared 20 minutes for that discussion. It was 45. They couldn't stop. All 20 of them, wanted to talk, except for one. It was one male. He was from the United Arab Emirates. And I had noticed a few, everyone had spoken but him. And I said, has everyone felt like they had their turn to speak? And then I moved on because I just felt, he might be not ready. And at the end, when we ask at the end of the 6 months, we do 3 days of training, then they go off and work for 2 months on those principles. Then we do 3 days of training, they go off and work again, and then we do 3 days and they have a graduation. So it's 6 months overall. And his response, they said, what is the one thing you learned or that impressed you about the program? And he spoke up and said, on the very first day, in the very first module, when everybody opened up and shared, he said, I had never experienced that my whole life. He said, we don't share like that in our culture. I had never seen that. He said, it just struck me. And he said, I will never forget that as long as I live. There was a woman this training, and when we asked them, what are you at midpoint, we say, what are you taking away? What have you learned? And she said it perfectly. She said, I'm learning to be in every single present moment, no matter what that moment holds for me. And I thought, that's it, you got it. They come with their hearts. We have at the graduation, they have a 5 minutes when and this is 99 people on a screen, 30 attendees, the facilitation team, which is 3 of us, and then all of corporate leadership and corporate management. So they got everything from the CEO on there, and they have 5 minutes. All 30 of them get 5 minutes, right? One after the other, to give their personal story. And I've never heard anything like it since I've been delivering this capstone. They are heart-wrenching. They are amazing. They are incredible. Sometimes they cry through the whole 5 minutes. Executive leadership tears up and cries with them. They're opening their hearts. They're actually now feeling strong enough to do that and be grateful for it. It's an incredible change. Really.
Anna, wow.
Yeah.
All I can say is wow. I wish we had more time, but I think you gave us a real taste of what you're doing. And I just want to acknowledge the capstone project that you're delivering, because as you said, it's not necessarily the easiest road. You've chosen something where there is skepticism, and you are a bridge builder. And I just want to acknowledge you for being a pioneer. The world will look back on this at one point when, hey, corporate leadership and compassion that won't even be a thought down the road. And it's because of capstone projects like yours and other initiatives for paving the way. So thank you for your time with us today. Thank you for being such a powerful ambassador of compassion and inspiration to me, and I'm sure to many people joining here today.
Yeah. Just let the work teach you. That's what I say. Let the work teach you. You don't have to have a plan. Just let the work teach you.
I love that.
It works.
Love that. It clearly worked for you.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Anna. Really appreciate you. And I'm going to turn it over now to my dear friend and colleague, Monica Hanson, who is also one of the co-founders and directors of the ACT program. And she'll be interviewing our final alumni for this session anyway. Monica?
Thank you, Neelama, and thank you, Dana, once again. It's my pleasure to introduce Chantal Paulson. She has over 18 years of experience in entrepreneurship, corporate finance, management, and investment banking, both in Brazil and the United States. Mrs. Paulson has been at major US Fortune 500 companies providing financial and economic advice in the areas of mergers and acquisitions, strategic planning, and business valuation. She has closed more than $1.1 billion in national and cross-border transactions, varying from acquisitions, strategic alliances, mergers, capital raisings, and IPOs. Right now, Mrs. Paulson is the CEO of BuildBid, a software as a service company specializing in cloud-based estimating, production, and invoicing software for creative professionals. Mrs. Paulson is an Applied Compassion 2020 alumni, and her capstone project in ACT was Applying Compassion in Leadership. So Chantal, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me here.
Thank you, Monica. It's so nice to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. So my first question for you is, the theme for tonight is, how is compassion changing the world? And you're a CEO of a software company, and you've described that work environment as high-paced, high-risk, unstable, and uncertain. And I think that description is one that many people here with us are likely experiencing, either in life or at work. It's fast-paced, it's unstable, it's uncertain, and it's demanding. So I'm hoping you'll begin by sharing with us, as a leader, as a CEO, how has applying compassion in that high pressure, uncertain, fast-paced, demanding environment helped?
Yeah, thank you. I think that one of the first things that had to happen for me, at least, was to let go of the idea that compassion is weakness, or that compassion is only for certain times or certain situations. Especially being a woman, being an immigrant in the country. I'm originally from Brazil, working the beginning of my career, the entire time in financial markets where it's male dominated and all that. You can't show weakness, right? Otherwise you're not taken seriously, or you don't achieve your goals. And it was very important for me to change that concept right in the beginning of the course of the ACT, to then be able to apply that to business, to leadership. For me, I then realized that it's an ally in stressful situations. It's an ally at the heat of the moment, when you think, I think I mentioned, or Dr. Doty said, somebody like, don't talk to compassion. Don't talk about compassion with me right now. We have to deal with this problem. The problem doesn't care if you apply compassion or not. The people care, right? So when I finally understood, and this is maybe just a parenthesis for people that are coming to know this program, and we actually do a lot of experiential exercises, right? So when you understand that, you actually understand because you feel it. You understand because you go through exercises that make you understand, not just with your mind, but with your heart and with your body in a more holistic way. When I finally understood that compassion is not weakness, that is something that you can apply, then it changed for me. Then I think that I was able to resist the emotion, or I guess not resist, but like understand the emotions that were coming and apply self-compassion. My capstone project was very focused on self-compassion. Mm-hmm. to those moments, and then it changes the conversation in the boardroom, in the meeting room. It literally changes the path of the conversation. That's one of the main things that I realized that it helps. If you are with a team and you are doing that work, the path of the conversation goes in a different way than it was before. You don't end up in that end. You don't end up in blaming games or patterns that before were more acute in a particular team or in a particular situation or subject. So that was for me, I think, the main shift that I saw in practicality with my work.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. When you and I talked about your experience in ACT, one additional thing that you shared that stood out to me about your capstone project is that you shared that it opened up new possibilities for what you are capable of as a leader. And that made me a little bit curious. Like, what are you doing today as a leader that's different than what you did before participating in ACT?
Yeah, Dr. Doty said in the beginning, he said that working with compassion releases innate power. And I think that what I discovered is, kind of translating into business, is that unlocks potentiality. That's like kind of the motto of my capstone project. It unlocks a lot of the potential that are in the room, in the team, in yourself, in your leadership position. So, for example, one of the examples that I think we talked about is I view strategy now much more in a much more clear way. And I understand that a bottom-up, for example, approach to strategy is not only possible, but is every good strategy has a part that needs to be bottom up instead of just top down. So I'm able to trust my team much more because I can have difficult conversations with them now in ways that I couldn't before. And when I open up this bottom up approaches to strategy, where the strategy comes kind of emerges, an emerging quality from the day-to-day conversations or the day-to-day work of teams, then the potentiality of the company expands. Things that you didn't think you could do before as a leader, as a company, or even it opens up a myopic view that you had before about what the company is. So it literally unlocks potentiality that you couldn't even see before. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And I thought of when Dr. Doty used the word power and potentiality, I thought of our conversation as well, because you had mentioned that it unlocked that kind of possibility, not only within you, but also that it was actually being enacted within your company as well, that power was being enacted within your company as well. I'm curious, Chantal, if you have any other reflections since you've been applying compassion at work. What's maybe changed for in addition to your company, maybe the managers or the employees that are there too?
Yeah, I think that for the managers, for the management team, it changed our views in a few ways. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we discussed is we decided to go, for example, we made a decision that it was counterintuitive, that is against the flow of what Silicon Valley usually have for, high growth companies. And we were able to look at ourselves as a company and as a team of management and really ask, what do we want? Who do we are, in a way that what made us vulnerable in that conversation, but it brought us a reality of where we wanted to be. And so one of the things that we did, for example, just to give an example, is we didn't go for a big round of funding, for example, which is usually the way SaaS, software as a service companies do. And we decided to go for a non-dilutive funding strategy which ended up very recently happening. And I strongly believe it was the best decision for the company. But I don't think we would have gotten there before, because egos would be involved, and we couldn't have that conversation of like, let's not do what everybody's doing, or let's not do what the book tells us to do, or the community tells us to do. But also because of that unlocking potentiality that we talked about, there's a lot of things that we had to process to get to a decision. And this is just an example. There are daily, I see that now, and I think Dana pointed this out, you're so more aware that this is available to you at any point. There's a saying that I used to love from when I visited Houston, NASA in Houston, that says, failure is not an option.
Mm-hmm.
And I changed that. I used to have a magnet on my fridge, failure is not an option. And I changed that to one that I handmade on a Post-it that says, compassion is always an option.
Ah. Wow, compassion is always an option. That's a very powerful statement coming from a CEO of a SaaS software as a service company in Silicon Valley, that compassion is always an option. So thank you. We have just another couple of minutes here, and I'm curious, is there any one last insight that you'd like to share about your experience of being a leader that's applying compassion, or from ACT, with everyone that's here today?
Yeah, I think from ACT, I think Dana and Ally brushed on it, but I want to say this, it is a very experiential course, and you are going to be in a safe space, experiencing compassion on a daily basis. And that is very transformational. You're almost not going to have an option to not become something different. It was a very powerful experience for me. Of course, very different than what I've been involved my entire life, which was very finance-based and business-based, and MBAs and all that stuff. Very, very different approach. But I feel like it was very transformational. It's a program that will change. It will change who you are. I think there's not a lot of way out of it when you go through it. It's very powerful. I would encourage anyone that has the time and the resources and the availability to embark on this journey with you.
Thank you, Chantal. Thank you. When you were saying that it's a course that will change who you are, I saw Deanna shaking her head as well. Yes, that was the case. So yeah. Thank you so very much. I deeply appreciate your willingness and availability to share your experiences of ACT with all of us. So thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing what's next to you as you continue to apply compassion and leadership. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. So I would first like to just take one step back here and thank our ACT alumni for sharing their experiences from the Applied Compassion Training Program here at Stanford with all of us. And of course, I wish the alumni that are here today, as well as all the alumni from our program, the very best as they continue to apply compassion in their personal and professional lives. Now, I also want to turn attention to everyone that's here and everyone that's watching or listening to this. And as promised, the theme for tonight is how compassion is changing the world. And you found that out by hearing from 3 of the alumni in ACT. In ACT, capstone projects are about applying compassion in tangible and practical ways that make a real difference. Maybe it's in healthcare, maybe it's in education, maybe executive leadership, or within a company or in a community, or with leaders themselves. The people and projects that are part of ACT is how compassion is changing the world. And I want to point all of you, if you'd like to find out more about the people that participate in ACT and the projects that they complete, please go to our website. It's appliedcompassionacademy.com. There are many more graduates and capstone projects that you can see there. These graduates and projects are actually right now being updated regularly because this is the month that we're preparing for the ACT 2021 graduation. And those there's actually 2 graduations because there's 2 cohorts this year, and those graduations start the beginning of November. So you're welcome to see more about our graduates and the fantastic work that they're doing out in the world at our website. So lastly here, I'm going to close with this request. And it's a request for you to consider registering for ACT 2022. We are very excited to be offering a second cohort for ACT 2022. The first cohort for ACT next year is already full, and there are a few spaces available in the second cohort. As you heard our alumni sharing their experiences of applying compassion, perhaps you felt yourself being called or moved, or sometimes I relate to compassion as a kick in the pants, to think about ways that you might be applying compassion in the world in real and significant ways. I can encourage you, if you're feeling that kind of calling or movement, to follow it and see yourself belonging in this vibrant community that's making a real difference in ACT 2022. If you are longing to have something be different at work, be different in your community, be different in your world, and you sense that applying compassion is needed, I encourage you to consider becoming part of ACT 2022. In ACT at CCARE Stanford, you're becoming part of a community that not only values compassion, but prioritizes taking compassionate action together and making a difference in the world. We take this compassionate action together with the full support and backing of CCARE at Stanford University. So if you're a person who sees the need for compassionate action at work, in your professional life, or in your community or world, and you want to join other people who are ready to act, then I encourage you to consider registering for ACT 2022. There's a lot of information about ACT on our website, and if you'd like more or to be able to talk with the founders and directors directly, we're going to be offering 2 question and answer information sessions coming up in November, and you'll see those days and the days and times and the Zoom meeting invite posted in chat so you could join us. So thank you once again for considering ACT 2022. And I'm going to hand this back to my dear friend and co-founder, Neelama.
Thank you, Monica. And I just want to echo again a huge and heartfelt thanks to all of our panelists, all of our alumni, both that joined here and presented today, but also everybody. I can kind of feel, whether you're on live with us right now, I'm sort of feeling the entire community of what we call Applied Compassion Ambassadors. There's about 170 some of you, and you truly lift me up. And I have a sense from reading some of the chat, you've inspired and lifted up so many people that are joining this session today. There's this thing in the compassion teachings that's been studied. It's called moral elevation. And there's quite a bit of science on it. You can Google it later that says even hearing about compassion, even learning about compassion in the ways we just did this evening with Dr. L.A. and Dana Hoshino and Chantal, Paulson, even just hearing these stories can uplift us and inspire us to be more compassionate in our lives. And I believe, and Dr. Doty and some of our panelists pointed to this, I believe that our interest and perhaps commitment to compassion is what brought us together today. Why else would we take 90 minutes out of our busy lives to come to a webinar like this? And this innate spark, this inherent capacity for compassion that lives in us and is part of our potential as humans, I can kind of see that drawing us here tonight. So as a way to close this webinar, before we say goodbye, I'm just going to invite us to take a moment and connect to that inherent capacity in each of us. For some of you, that might mean just shifting around in your chairs for a moment, and if it feels comfortable for you, taking a couple of breaths, maybe even closing your eyes if that feels comfortable for you, or just directing your gaze downward. As we heard from Dr. Doty, compassion is inherent in us. This beautiful quality that we have as human beings to recognize suffering and then want to do something about it. That is one simple way of understanding the compassionate impulse in you and in me. And as you connect to that impulse in you, that part of you that looks out at our world and can see suffering and wants to make a difference, just take a moment here as we close this session and reflect on one small act. No pun intended, one small act that you could take in your own surroundings to help alleviate suffering, to bring a little bit of kindness and compassion to someone today. Maybe it's a family member who's struggling, or a colleague at work who's facing a challenge, or a charitable cause that you feel moved to contribute to. See if you can make in your heart a commitment to taking an action towards this person, this loved one, this cause, to help make their lives just a little bit lighter, a little bit better. And with that, I'll invite you just to take a couple of deeper breaths as a way to complete this little meditation here. And opening your eyes or lifting your gaze one last time as we come to completion of this webinar. Thank you all for your time, for devoting time to the precious work of compassion. And if you are interested in learning more about the program, you have these links in chat, and you can always reach us and find us directly on our website and CCARE's website at Stanford. Until we meet again, on behalf of myself and my colleagues, Robert and Monica at ACT, and Dr. Doty, the director of CCARE, sending all of you warmth and compassion as you go forth in your own ways, in your own lives, of making this world a better place. Take good care, everyone, and see you next time. Bye-bye.